Good morning, students. So today I will be presenting you a lecture on the topic that is encapsulation and inheritance. These were the four features of object-oriented programming system: polymorphism, encapsulation, inheritance, and abstraction. I have already explained you about the first feature called polymorphism in my earlier presentation. So today I will be explaining you about the second and the third feature of object-oriented programming system, which are in encapsulation and inheritance. So let's start with encapsulation in Java. The word encapsulation means packaging in or hiding something from the external users. In a computer program, encapsulation is used to restrict the data member from being accessed outside of the class. That means data members which have been encapsulated can be accessed within its own class, but it cannot be accessed outside of the class. So in that way, encapsulation makes a program much secured. To practice encapsulation in computer programs, access specifiers are used. There are four types of access specifiers in Java. Those are public, private, protected, and friendly. Under the access specifier public, the public members of a class are accessible outside the class. That means when the members are declared as public, they shall be accessible within their own class as well as outside of their class. Consider the figure shown in this slide. This figure consists of two classes, the class computer and then the class user. Now consider the data members serial node speed and RAM size for the class name computer. They have been specified the public access specifier. That's why these data members shall be accessible within its own class computer as well as they shall be accessible to the outside class user as well. Now under the private access specifier mode, the private members are accessible only within the same class. That means the members which have been declared as private access specifier shall be accessible within its own class only. They shall not be accessible outside of their class. Now consider this figure. In this figure, the class called computer possesses data members which have been declared of type private as the access specifier instead of public. And since these data members serial node speed and RAM size are declared of type private as the access specifier, so these data members shall be accessible only within their own class called computer. They shall not be accessible to the outside class called user. Now the next access specifier is protected. So under the protected access specifier mode, the protected members of a class are accessible to the inherited class. That means the members under the protected access specifier section shall be accessible within its own class and to the inherited classes. Now before that, you need to learn the concept of inheritance. So let's start with inheritance. Inheritance is the mechanism of reusing the properties of an object by another object. Inheritance exists in our real life too. For example, a child inherits the properties from its parent, and this inheritance is shown by this arrow symbol. Now consider this figure. As circles, rectangles, and triangles all are a kind of shape, so they share some common properties from the class shape or from the object shape. Now let's discuss about the type of inheritance. Now Java as a programming language supports only three types of inheritance, that is single inheritance, multi-level inheritance, and hierarchical inheritance. But Java does not support the multiple inheritance. Let's start with single inheritance. In a single inheritance, a class will inherit the properties of its parent class. So the class which inherits the properties from the parent class is known as the child class, and we also called the child class as the derived class and the parent class as the base class. So in this figure, the class chairs, which is the derived class, will inherit the properties of the base class furniture. So this form of inheritance, where one derived class inherits the properties from one base class, is known as the single inheritance. Then the next type of inheritance is multiple inheritance, where there is one derived class which will be inheriting the properties from multiple base classes. So in this figure, the derived class audio video inherits the properties from the base classes audio and video. But unfortunately, Java does not support this type of inheritance. So multiple inheritance is not supported in Java. Now consider this form of inheritance known as the multi-level inheritance. Here, there shall be a derived class which will be inheriting the properties of a base class, which in turn again becomes a derived class when it inherits the properties of another base class. Now, in this example, there is one derived class called human which inherits the properties of the base class mammals, which in turn again becomes a derived class when it inherits the properties from another base class called animal. So such type of inheritance, where a base class becomes a derived class for another class, is known as the multi-level inheritance. Then come to the next form of inheritance known as the hierarchical inheritance. In this type of inheritance, multiple derived classes inherits the properties from a base class. In this figure, there are two derived classes, hardware and software, which inherits the properties from the base class computer. Now consider the figure in this slide. In this figure, there is a class called computer, which is the base class, and there are two different classes, user1 and user2, which are the derived classes, as they acquire the properties or inherits the properties from the base class called computer. Now this form of inheritance, where there are multiple derived classes and which inherits the properties from the base class computer, is known as the hierarchical inheritance, and the figure looks similar to this one, which I have already explained. So this form of inheritance here, where the derived classes user1 and user2 inherits the properties from the base class computer, is the hierarchical inheritance. So these three classes, computer, user1 and user2, are connected with each other through inheritance. But the class user3 is in no way connected with the classes computer, user1 and user2. This is because the class user3 do not share inheritance characteristics from the classes computer, user1 or user2. In a way, this class user3 is a standalone class, which is in no way connected with these three classes. Now from this figure, I will explain you the concept of the protected access specifier. Now that the protected members of a class are accessible to the inherited class, that's why the data members serial no speed and RAM size, which were declared of type protected as the access specifier for the class named computer, shall be accessible within its own class called computer, as well as they shall be accessible to the inherited classes user1 and user2. But these data members shall not be accessible to the class user3, because the class user3 is not an inherited member for the class computer. So keep in mind that whenever the data members are declared of type protected as the access specifier, they shall be accessible within its own class and as well as to its inherited classes. The next type of access specifier used in Java is the friendly access specifier. Under the friendly access specifier mode, the members which have been declared as friendly access specifier shall be accessible across all the classes of the same package in Java. So friendly access specifier allows you to group related classes together in a package so that they can easily interact with each other. The friendly members are accessible across all classes of the same package in Java. Now consider the figure in this slide. This figure consists of three different classes, that is class A, class B and class C, but they all fall under the same package. But there is one class specified by the name class D, which is a standalone class, as it does not fall in the package comprising of the classes class A, class B and class C. Since the classes class A, class B and class C falls under the same package, so their members are mutually accessible to each other. That means the members of all these classes shall be mutually accessible to each other. But for the class D, which do not fall under this package, their data members shall not be accessible to the classes A, B and C. And this is clearly explained here. The classes A, B and C comes under the same package, so their members are mutually accessible to each other. But the class D is outside of the package of the class A, class B and class C. So the members of class D are not accessible to the classes class A, class B and class C of the package. Now let's come to the third point. The members of a class are friendly by default. Now if you look at this figure, the data members serial no speed and RAM size were declared of type protected as the access specifier for the class called computer. But for the data members from the classes user1, user2 and user3, they have not been specified any access specifier. So these data members from the classes user1, user2 and user3 will come under the friendly access specifier mode by default. So with this I end my presentation here.